Hi, mine's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'm going to be continuing the bit of a series with Mike Galsworthy of European Movement UK, discussing Brexit-related topics which seemed pertinent at the time, and with the top political story at the moment being far-right rioting, and the claims that they're being driven by concerns about immigration, we decided to talk about the real concerns of immigration separated out from the violence, from reasonable people, not the thugs, and what the reality is in terms of government policy and economic impacts. So there's been a couple of interesting polls from YouGov. There was one yesterday showing that actually the vast majority of the population, including the vast majority of Reform UK voters, do not want any leniency shown to the rioters. So they do not accept that the riots are a justified way of expressing any legitimate concerns. But a lot of people do think that some of these stated concerns, if they were to protest them peacefully, are legitimate. So we could have a little look at that. Now, if I just throw in a couple of thoughts of my own, first of all, because first of all, when I see people saying they have legitimate concerns about immigration, there's several lines I could take, but one of them straight away is, if you supported Brexit, and I noticed that some of these people support other things as well that actively increase immigration. So we know that during the referendum campaign, people like Nigel Farage pushed an anti-immigration line that was very specifically immigration from outside of Europe, which of course could only possibly increase as a result of Brexit. And we've seen that. We've seen EU-based immigration into the UK drop dramatically, but these are white Europeans mostly. But what we've seen is a massive increase, completely out of proportion to the drop in EU immigration, of migration from outside of Europe, from Africa and from Asia in particular. So they got the opposite of what they wanted. In terms of if they've got a particular beef, because they don't seem to separate it out, but we could separate it out into economic migration, for which if you'd have come from outside the EU at the time, you would have needed a visa, or asylum seeking. But then the same people will say things like we should stop foreign aid, or they support actions that create refugees. Basically, they support other powers around the world, whether it be Russia or Syria, who actually turn weapons on people in other countries or in their own country, creating a refugee crisis. They support policies which have pushed climate change, which creates refugees in other ways. So they support politicians who support creating refugee crises, and then complain when there are asylum seekers turn up on our door. So what are your sort of thoughts on that as well?
So when people say that they have legitimate concerns, you have to separate that from, are you expressing your concerns in legitimate ways? So when it comes to protests, if you're out on the streets with a brick in your hand and you're trying to throw it through the window of a mosque or a local shop because you're feeling peckish, that is not a legitimate way in order to protest whatever concern you may have. I've been on lots of protests, usually on protests. You tell the police about it beforehand. It's an organized event. You've got your marshals. You can tell they can tell people where the toilets are. You've got a stage where there are speakers that articulate what is the common concern here, and you tell the press that speakers are making these speeches. It's not a gathering where you just tell people to gather and they come along with cans of beers and then kick off with the police for anyone they don't like the look of. So that's a fundamental thing. That apart from legitimate concerns, what are legitimate ways of petitioning your government locally or nationally? And why I worry when the mainstream media says legitimate concerns and these anti-immigration protests, it kind of says well, this is an okay way to protest. Look at these people going out balaclavering
Yeah.
themselves up with bricks in their hands. This is the kind of protest that gets attention. And then you get called a protester. I'm just protesting. I'm protesting my concerns. And I think that distinction hasn't been made hard enough. Now, when it comes to what people are protesting about, I think obviously it's a conflated blob. When you have a violent incident like that in Southport, then everyone's emotions, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, goes right up because it's horrendous. Um, and of course, many people quickly like to place the blame on wherever they like to place it, rather than holding back and waiting for the law to come through. And if you don't believe that the law is functioning very well, then that comes through quickly, and basically it becomes a spearhead for you to download a whole load of other concerns. So when it comes to immigration, we do need to separate that from the behavior of thuggery and riots in the street, but we also need to deal with people's conceptions about immigration, because a lot of bundling happens between immigrants that are here for economic reasons because they were deliberately invited, immigrants that have sought a life here because they want to contribute to the country, asylum seekers that are fleeing other countries and are quite allowed under international law to get to another country where they feel safest or have connections, and then try to prove that case. And also students coming over.
Yes.
Now, what our government does, and I don't think they should be doing this, is they bundle everyone into the same number. Maybe they do a little breakdown later in the sophisticated papers like Financial Times or Economist, but generally they say, this is the number. This is the number of, sometimes they'll separate out legal and illegal. People are starting to get through the notion of those that are coming in on visas and those that are coming in under their own steam, and the government doesn't like it. But let's leave that there. But even with the legal immigration, that has been horrendously handled, because ever since the year dot, but particularly since Brexit, our government has been saying immigration bad, immigration bad, immigration bad. We need to get it down. But what happened after Brexit, when the EU, our fellow EU citizens went home, there were huge gaps, in particularly in our NHS and social care. And so our government went out to India and Nigeria and said, please, please come to play roles in our NHS, like we did with Windrush. We need the help. So they advertised all of these roles. They expanded a visa program in order to replace the flux out from the European citizens, but they didn't at the same time tell the UK populace, this is what we're doing because we have to. And if we want to keep our economy afloat, we have to do this. And this was proven by the fact that when that massive immigration number came in, that also came in at the same time that the government said, look, we've just avoided a recession. You see, it was going to be, but it wasn't. We've just avoided it. Even though the GDP per capita dropped, which means that if there were fewer people in the country, we would have been in recession. So immigration actually saved this country from entering recession. But our government didn't say that. They acted shocked. How did this big number happen? We need to hit them hard. People we've just invited in, we need to hit them hard, keep them out. They can't bring their families along. We need to put up the threshold of how much you can earn before you come here.
At least that's been knocked on the head.
Because they are being absolutely two-faced with the public here.
Yeah, I agree with the messaging.
Two-faced with the public. And that is the powder keg that they've handed on to Keir Starmer. Southport was the spark. And then, to be fair, lots of Conservatives are being quiet. But certainly, there's a few idiots, Liz Truss included, that are looking to put this all at Starmer's door and say, how can you call everyone who's got concerns far right, da da da. And this is the mess that we've got now, where basically the behavior is illegitimate, but some worries are legitimate because they have been instructed that their worries are legitimate by successive governments that haven't been straight with them.
No, the messages I would certainly pick out from what you just suggested there. So first of all, as I was saying to my partner, if you were to do a pie chart of different forms, for example, of immigration, and if you were to put asylum in there, you wouldn't see the sector on the pie chart. It would be too small. So first of all, people need to be... The problem has been made visibly bigger by not processing claims. Therefore, you end up with because a law was put in place from mid-2022 that basically says anyone who claims asylum in this country cannot be processed, which means that all the ones who, if you did process them, would fail their claim, who can be deported, can't be deported because you haven't proved they don't have a valid claim, which means you then permanently have to house them. And then they are costing the taxpayer because they're also not allowed to work. So they created this very visible problem, therefore, with the hotels that have now been targeted. And also by cutting out, like what you would call safe routes, you create this situation where, of course, they're going to then arrive by boat. The boats problem didn't exist before 2018. It started in 2018. Didn't exist before then. And so you created these visible signs.
There was also a factor that there were people coming in on lorries through the Eurotunnel before. Yes. And this is a new route. But as you pointed out, if you cut out all the safe routes, then you increase the demand for these
people are already unsafe. Their lives are already in danger. That's why some of them may not be genuine asylum seekers. We know from Home Office figures during Suella Braverman's time, when she ran the Home Office, roughly 1 out of every 4 claims would fail. It doesn't mean to say they weren't legitimate; they just couldn't be proven. But but that meant 3 out of 4 could be proven, including some from Rwanda. So there's that side. But then, as you mentioned the students thing, because this is absolutely maddening to me, because even after Brexit, higher education in this country is a rare growth industry. And students are effectively like super tourists. They come here, they spend a lot of money, they're young, they don't generally need much in terms of public services. They come here basically to contribute. The odd one might get ill, right? For which they'll pay anyway, because you don't get access to NHS treatment for free. You're not a British citizen. So you still pay anyway. This is why if you go to like A&E, you have to give them your details. They have to find your NHS number because you don't get free treatment on the NHS, despite what Leanderthal says. He doesn't actually understand how the NHS works. So these are super tourists. They come here, they spend a lot of money over a few years, and then if they want a job after it, well, they'll need a work visa for that. Otherwise, they go somewhere else. They go back to their own country or another country to find work. So they're either going to be contributing as a young person, having spent a load of money in our economy and will now be contributing more money into our treasury, or they will go back somewhere else because they have no automatic right, therefore, to stay in this country. It's like, can we use you or not? And doing something as performatively stupid as not allowing dependents to come with them is basically strangling off what is one of our few remaining sectors of our economy that can actually withstand Brexit. It's an utter madness.
I like your description of super tourists. That's good because they are like tourists. They just stay longer and spend more. The way I've always thought about it was our higher education system is one of our greatest exports, where people also come onto our soil in order to get the export. So we're exporting all of this knowledge as well as our culture and soft power into this massive global biomarket. I mean, how many leaders of nations around the world have gone through the British education system
Yeah.
at some point.
Some of them quite nasty leaders, yeah. But this is the thing. I mean, all these people say, "Oh, our culture's brilliant. British culture's brilliant." So why don't we want to share it with the world? Why don't we want the rest of the world
Especially
to
when
enjoy it?
they want to come here and spend money on restaurants and cabs and travel and visiting our museums and all of the stuff. See, when tourists come over, they spend money on the things that really, really maintain our culture.
Yeah.
Because that's what they want. They want
Yes.
to see the British culture.
Yeah.
So bundling students into big scary number figures and then saying, "Oh, we need to cut down on that too," is absolutely daft. And it's because no one wants to spend the money explaining, just providing information to people about what a benefit this is to our country. But also, I think we need to go further, and I think we need to find a way of showing the money and finances that come into the country through tourism, through students, and through immigration, and say this money is X amount, and it goes into these communities where people stay and so people can actually see the benefit. Oh, so you're telling me that when immigrants come and settle in my town, we get extra money from that for our GP services, our local hospital, the primary school, and the rest, and even our roads, because there's an acknowledgement that the bandwidth needs to be open. So actually, the more we can get in, the more our infrastructure will become healthy. You see, that back in 2010, the Labour government had an immigration fund that went to local areas. It wasn't big, but it was there. But under austerity, it got cut. Yeah. And a lot of the problems that we're seeing now in our country are the hangover, the delayed response of austerity, of lack of community funding into all of these areas, lack of engagement with people about the benefits of being in Europe, the benefits of having immigration, and actually having people all over the world wanting to come to your country. I mean, the modern America was built on being a proud immigrant nation and celebrating all of that. And woof, look at their economy take off, during that period in particular, after the war especially. And so because there wasn't all of this investment in the infrastructure, in the communities, in the explanations, in the education, and then money being wasted on Brexit and money being wasted during COVID, it's now that Keir Starmer has inherited the collective bundle of time bombs that all of those are. And it's just a horrible place to be in.
I almost thought we were going to get there in 2020. Do you remember 2020 and I think it may have been Labour, but MPs were calling for the NHS surcharge. So, it's not just that immigrants come here and contribute. They pay extra taxes specifically for the NHS. And there were calls for NHS workers to not have to pay the NHS surcharge at least. And Boris Johnson said we can't do that because the NHS funding utterly relies on it. So he was sort of making the point that the NHS funding model is reliant on immigration. I mean, we were only talking about removing the NHS surcharge from immigrants working in the NHS, remember? Not all immigrants working in the country, just in the NHS, although that's a huge chunk of it.
Yeah.
And he said that would be unsustainable. We cannot fund the NHS. So he was making the point, which unfortunately people didn't really run with, that the NHS was utterly dependent on immigrants, not just for staffing, but for funding.
Yes.
So I almost thought, but I suppose it was impossible in the background of COVID, but you almost thought there could have been a penny drop moment there, which never happened.
A little through the light bulb. But ever since the NHS was founded, um, we have relied on immigrants to be absolutely at the heart of that community, both in terms of the work and in terms of the funding. You know, the Windrush generation were invited in to help rebuild the country, but particularly to help out with the new NHS. And right down through the decades, I mean, the proportion of Indian doctors in the NHS is huge. And then before Brexit, we had, what was it, 7% of NHS nurses were from the EU, but 5% of our population at large was from the EU. So our NHS were disproportionately represented in terms of EU citizens. And that is on top of, like you said, calculations that show that immigrants provide more sort of revenue to the tax take than do natives, which is kind of what you'd expect if you're attracting some of the best and the brightest and the most capable in the world, who tend to be people who move, want to be entrepreneurial, want to have world experience into your country. So the irony being that the old sort of Stone Age brain is kind of like, this is our valley. We can't possibly have other people come into our tribe because there aren't enough blueberries and rabbits for them as well. You know, and that's the fundamental thinking, that if you're in a country and resources feel strained, then other people coming in strains resources. But actually, when those people coming in can provide resources too, that changes the dynamic. And what you see with certainly EU immigrants at the time, because I looked at that specifically with the NHS, they were supply side heavy, not demand side heavy.
Well, the other thing as well is, I mean, first of all, you could say of the immigrants that are draining resources, they come in via private jet. But if you've got someone coming in to work, then they're of working age, so they're mostly fit and healthy, so they don't really demand much. They've got a job, so they don't really need that much in public services. We haven't had to educate them as children. So if you try and come up with some sort of model where you have zero or net zero immigration, that means you've got to put all of those people through school as children, support them all as children. And then when they retire, you've got to support them all others. Well, that can't work. When they talk about unsustainable immigration numbers, no, what's unsustainable is that model, because it can't possibly work. So then you end up with people like Liz Truss saying, well, people should just retire when they're 75, because that's all. Because when you actually force them to explain how you make this model work, that's what they will have to say. They will have to say, well, you can't retire then, because we can't. It is not possible with a purely domestic workforce to sustain a retired population in a country like ours. It's impossible. So you therefore have to say that the only people who can retire are those whose bodies are broken by their work, so they have to retire due to ill health. And a society that would do that is not going to look after them in retirement, because as far as they're concerned, you're a drain. If you accept the notion that you have to work for as long as you can, as soon as you can't, you are then a drain, and they're going to expend limited resources on you, as limited as they possibly can. That is the inevitable destination they want to look at.
So two points here that I think you'll find interesting. The first, I heard articulated by Zoe Gardner. She's great, and she said, for those people who are saying that their pension can't be threatened, they earned it, and they're anti-immigrant at the same time, what they need to realize is this, that as they work throughout their life, their tax contributions were not saved up for their personal pensions, a little magical pot somewhere. They were being spent in real time on the generation before them, the war generation. Good for them. Well done. You did your bit for that generation. But who is supporting you now? It's the current working age population in this country,
Yeah.
and that is both native Brits and the immigrants that have come here to work in this country, contribute to this country, and contribute to your pensions. Do you really want to send them back because you didn't have enough kids of your own to support you
Mm.
to the level of finance that you've come to expect? So that's a really important awareness to have there. The second thing is that when it comes to staffing of the NHS, I've heard lots of people say, oh, we should train up our own. We shouldn't be reliant on other countries anyway. So, we we shouldn't even be having that immigration. Well, firstly, yes, we definitely should be training our own. And in fact, until we have enough of our own that we've trained at home, why would we cut off a
Yeah.
pipeline that we badly need?
And we can't train them overnight anyway.
Yeah, you can't
Like
train them
you've got to
overnight.
first
So
of all create the places, then you've got to train them, and then when you have trained them, like you're a decade down the line, you've got some new doctors. Well done. They're inexperienced doctors, so it then how long does it take to get a consultant out of this? You're talking 2 generations.
yeah, so exactly. So good idea, right plan. Like, why haven't our governments been doing it? But anyway, if that's the point that you want to get to, let's say that all of your doctors and nurses come from your country, and not from any other country, then consider this. Spanish doctors, when they first train in Spain, Spain produces something of a surplus of nurses in some areas. Sorry, this is nurses. And they get points for going and working in other EU countries. And a lot of them used to come to the UK to get points and credits by working in a different country and then going back to Spain. Why do they do that? Because of transferable
Yeah.
skills and experience. Swapping of techniques and ideas and the actual suppliers that you buy from and how you use them. The human transferable skills thing is massive. You see it in science too. And people say, you're draining from these nations. And I like to think, yeah, when I was in Slovenia, I knew a surgeon called Gordon, and he went to Ireland. But then he came back. He came back to Slovenia with all of those skills. But then, fair enough, he did go off to Cambridge. But then he came back
Yeah.
again, and now he's settled down there with his family. And he, by dint of actually going to these other countries and working in Addenbrooke's and working in, I think it was Dublin was the other one, he's brought back, a wealth of skills and richness. And this is why when we do a trade deal with India, the thing that the Indian government wants is visas for their people. Why? Why do they want to send away their best and brightest? Because they want to invest in circulation of talent, and they want to be in that loop. They know a lot of them are going to come back for family reasons, and they'll come back with skills. And so cutting yourself out of the free flow of talent, I mean, as a scientist, this is our lifeblood, right? But you see it in the health profession as well, at the coalface. Just having that mix of experience is vital.
Everywhere.
So it does actually benefit everyone if you set it up in the right way to be collaborative rather than aggressively competitive, and everyone does their bit.
It happens in absolutely every sector where there is any innovation. The only place I can imagine you work in where you wouldn't appreciate it is somewhere like McDonald's that has a set procedure throughout the world. It's like, no, you're going to do it this way. But like in teaching, I've worked in schools and I've worked in colleges and I worked in different places. And every time I went to a new place, there were things from the previous place I'd worked that I could sort of say to my new colleagues, we used to do it, we had this and we used to do it like this. And you can then adapt from that, and everyone else has their experiences from previous places they've worked, and it all just makes you stronger. Absolutely everywhere, any workplace where any innovation is encouraged benefits from you having experiences somewhere else.
Yep.
Within a country or without or extra to that country.
Yeah.
It's only not appreciated by people who are taught, no, you're a robot basically, you're going to do this thing in this way, and that's how we do it everywhere.
Yeah. So, I mean, so for me, in the current sort of context of all of these riots, I think my summary would be it's desperately irresponsible when governments do genuinely understand the benefits of being connected to all of that mobility, but they don't invest in explaining that to the population at large, investing in programs about this, or even, because, education does never just pump them full of the right information, then it won't be a problem, but actually inclusive discussion on some of these issues so that our citizenry feel empowered. And there is one thing that's very true here that people can have a legitimate concern about, and that is the government say one thing and do another.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely maddening. And that indicates very strongly that they either think you're thick or they don't trust you to make the right choices. But either way, they're not going to be honest with you. And so that anger is very real. And that, I would say, that part is certainly a legitimate concern and a legitimate anger.
And I would say, I would echo your other point as well. People, like, you can try and explain things to people and they'll believe you if you don't. But if you show people a link, if people feel a link, like, the Conservatives lost very badly because people felt the link between... They felt their standard of living dropping very, very quickly. They felt that. If you get people to feel improvements, but don't, not just it be general improvements. Obviously, the government would like to take credit for it and need to. But if you can link it to things, so if there are good policies that the population at large think are bad policies, then you have to show that those policies are personally benefiting. So, like you say, making it clear. That, like in Ireland, who are very proudly EU, and they've got, this project was funded by the EU. It's all the blue plaques everywhere. Having something similar to like that, just having it in the local media and really pushing it. This extension was funded by the extra taxes as a result of, immigration. Really, having some link between the tax revenues brought in by immigrants and the expenditure on it, and showing, because there's no end of reports. The reports published all the time. You can find them on the House of Commons website, showing the disparity, how immigrants disproportionately contribute to the Treasury without withdrawing from it. But that message doesn't really get pushed out to local communities in a way that says, as you say, well, that local nursery had some extra money because of this or something like that. Because there are, lots of people who might have these concerns about immigration because it's a very simple thing to say. You can't get a doctor's appointment very easily. Schools are crowded, and you think, and it's very easy to get those people to think if there were fewer people in the queue, then you would be able to get stuff like that, because they just assume that the resourcing would remain the same. There's just fewer people in the queue. They don't realise that the people...
It's all about resource management. It's entirely about resource management. Same thing with jobs. The classic thing, they're coming here and taking our jobs.
Yeah.
Well, immigrants coming into the country are also much, much more likely than natives to be entrepreneurs. So they generate jobs. Similarly, when we're part of the EU and we've got big shared sort of funding structures, then that generates, I'm thinking about science here, that generates jobs in the country, and people say, why are you having, people from other countries come in here and, setting up labs and things like that rather than our own? Because when they set up labs here, if they're particularly good, then they get funding from all over the world and they hire local students, local technicians, and things like that. So bringing in the best from around the world not only increases the number of jobs, but it increases the choice of jobs and the number of quality jobs.
There's quite a lot of jobs we don't have. I mean, there was a recent report, the Food Standards Agency produced, their scientific officer produced a report saying one of the particular problems we've got with food standards is we don't have enough entry-level toxicologists, for example. Well, go and do that job. We've got shortage of toxicologists. Oh, you're not a toxicologist? So we're going to have to immigrate some toxicologists, aren't we? Because you don't have those skills.
Yeah.
Because if people are studying toxicology, of course they want a job in it, but we haven't got enough toxicologists, therefore you haven't studied it. So we need to get someone who has studied it, if that's not in this country. And, you know, like you say, we should maybe, the government should encourage people with financial inducements or whatever is needed to study more of these things. We have a skill shortage. But where we have a skill shortage, we can't just maintain that skill shortage because that's bad for our economy and in this case our food health.
Yep.
So therefore we have to get those people with the skills from where they exist, and if they exist outside this country, that's where we get them from.
Totally. So essentially the government should be monitoring where there are skills gaps, where we're hiring from abroad, and say, right, let's put money into making sure this opportunity is available for locals, and put a big amount of effort on that. But if you can't get locals in time, are you really going to turn off the taps and dry up our businesses and our universities? Because that will mean that some of those businesses go down, or they don't fill placements for a long time and get outcompeted by an American company or, you know, a German company or what have you. So I'm all for the home training. In fact, I really, really want the home training, and I think a competent government is one that's always looking out for opportunities for its citizens. But it's not an either or. It's not a case of if we don't have enough UK nurses, then let's just shut it off to the outside world and let the NHS collapse. It's kind of like, no, we're thanking the lifeline of these nurses coming in from other countries, and we understand that many want to go back. But while that's happening, we realize that we need to do our responsible bit in the world and make sure we're doing sufficient of our own training. Also bearing in mind that it's a good and healthy thing that some of the nurses that we train will want to go off to Australia or Germany or the States or Canada or wherever.
Yeah. I mean, the way I look at it as well, and just in terms of jobs, so if we've got if you've got a restaurant, and let's say you need a chef and you can't find a decent chef, you can't just hire a rubbish one because no one will come to your restaurant. So you've got like 9 staff, you've got wait staff, you've got your sous chef, you've got your maitre d', you've got all that set up, but you can't find a head chef. So you get one from France. Well, some of these people say, oh, no, you shouldn't get it from France. Well, okay, so then the restaurant closes because you can't get a decent chef. And then those other 9 British workers lose their jobs.
Yep. And also, if you had gotten that French guy, he could have trained up all of your guys. Yeah. But then when you spun out your second and third restaurant, because now you know, like, James was kind of like really his protege, and so kind of like James can go and do what Jacques taught him, and he sets up, you know, your second restaurant in Birmingham.
Yeah.
I mean,
but like you say, it's not being communicated to people.
Yeah.
The media don't do it, and the government have been poor.
That's why I do understand some levels of anger, because the country at large is being patronised and lied to and misled, and they know that they're being patronised and lied to and misled. It doesn't mean that the answer is we shut up our borders to keep everyone happy, but the answer definitely lies in proper conversational structures around not just immigration, but the whole management of our communities. Because there's so much in the management of our communities where people feel disempowered. Yeah. Like, what prospect do their kids have for future? A lot of people just feel completely disempowered. And this, to expand it like completely on a tangent, for me goes into the whole public versus privatization thing. People are fully aware that they may have been here, their family may have been here for generations, investing in the country and investing in structures of the company, sometimes public structures, and then the family silver gets sold off, and suddenly they're nothing more than customers of big companies, and their complaints against them go nowhere, and they know their kids are also just new little customers being bought. And the sense of ownership of your nation, your national structures, your region and your local area and those structures, where is your ownership of that for all the building that's been happening? And I think people feel that acutely. So cheeky plug here, but I have thought for quite a few years that the community building aspect of all of this is really important, and re-empowering people on a local level and all of that. And that's why in 2020 I went to Peter Jukes at Byline Times and said, right, can we sort of do what you're doing, but on local and regional levels, and almost empowering local groups? And these were mainly pro-EU groups I was thinking about, and where do they go now? Empowering local groups to just be able to do their own articles, so that they don't have to go, begging a diminishing local news service that's only interested in clickbait. How do we sort of let citizens build their own articles for public good? So, I mean, we've been doing that since 2020. And I would just like to say, if you're interested in writing for the Bylines Network, do get in touch. If you want to get the app, get the app. It's free, but please get involved with all of that, because what we're doing increasingly is we are getting, as well as discussing the national stories, lots and lots of local stories about local for good initiatives, local charities, local events, and sort of thinking about how we cross-engage, expand diversity, and really build in the local and regional communities. So all help on that front, whether you're a monthly donor to it, or whether you're a writer, or whether you're just a reader, is really appreciated, because I think with local news pulling out in the way that it is, and some not so nice social media groups coming in and making claims unchecked, to actually have a citizen journalism platform that is screened by editors, where editors will help you and also impress regulated, that kind of citizen voice empowerment with regulation and quality control, I think is something that we just really need to build up. So there we go. That's a blatant plug for what I do, or what I've helped support, a whole team of people doing. But I do think, in the context of all of this violence and misunderstanding, that we do need to invest in the good structures.
Yes. So there we are. Links in the description below to both European Movement UK if you'd like to join, or just sign up as a supporter, as well as the contacts for Byline Times if, as Mike suggests, you'd like to contribute to their writing. Thanks for listening. If you made it this far, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I'll see you later.